The terrifying thing about powerful men isn't when they yell. It's when they speak softly and everyone else goes silent. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of belladonnas, like impatient fingers demanding entry, each flash of lightning turning the crystal chandeliers silver for half a second before the restaurant sank back into warm amber shadows. Friday nights in Manhattan always felt loud, expensive, alive. But that night felt wrong from the moment I walked in. Maybe it was the bruise hidden beneath my sleeve aching every time I lifted a tray. Maybe it was the text messages lighting up my phone every 3 minutes. Where are you? You think you can ignore me? Or maybe it was the man sitting alone at the corner table near the fireplace. Vincent Moretti. Even the name carried weight in New York. At 65 years old, he looked nothing like the loud rich men who filled the private dining rooms downtown. No flashy watch. No gold rings. No younger women draped across his arm. Just a charcoal suit tailored perfectly across broad shoulders that age hadn't softened, silver hair combed neatly back, and pale gray eyes that missed absolutely nothing. People lowered their voices around him without realizing they were doing it. The bartender stood straighter. The managers checked his table personally. And every few minutes, another man in an expensive black coat approached quietly to speak to him before disappearing again like a ghost. I tried not to stare. Men like Vincent Moretti didn't belong in my world. Men like him existed in whispers. In newspaper headlines that vanished by morning. In stories waitresses traded after closing shifts when they thought nobody important could hear them. "Claire," my manager hissed as I passed the kitchen doors. "Table 7 needs another bottle, and smile a little, okay? You look pale." I forced a nod and grabbed the wine bottle with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I hadn't slept much in weeks. Ryan made sure of that. Every argument stretched until sunrise. Every apology somehow became my fault. Every promise to leave dissolved the second he cried and swore he'd change. But tonight felt different. Tonight he'd been calling non-stop since 6 o'clock. 43 missed calls. I counted. Because fear makes you count stupid things. I was halfway across the dining room when the front doors opened hard enough for cold wind to sweep through the restaurant. Conversations paused. My stomach dropped before I even looked up. Ryan Keller stood near the entrance, rain soaking through his leather jacket, blue eyes already locked onto me with a kind of intensity that made my chest tighten. "Claire," he called loudly, ignoring the hostess trying to stop him. "We're leaving." Every muscle in my body locked. "Sir, you can't." The hostess started nervously, but Ryan brushed past her like she wasn't there. Customers began turning toward us openly now. My heartbeat thundered so loudly I barely heard my manager whisper, "Jesus Christ." Ryan reached me beside table 12 and grabbed my wrist hard enough to send pain shooting up my arm beneath the hidden bruise. "I've been calling you for 2 hours," he snapped under his breath. "You think embarrassing me is funny?" "Ryan, please," I whispered quickly. "Not here." "Then let's go." He pulled harder. The wine bottle slipped from my fingers and shattered across the marble floor, red wine splashing like blood beneath the chandelier light. The entire restaurant went silent. Not quieter. Silent. I could feel people staring. My breathing turned shallow. Ryan leaned closer, furious now that everyone was watching. "You belong with me," he hissed. "Stop making scenes." Panic climbed into my throat so fast it burned. My eyes moved desperately across the room searching for anyone at all to help me. But wealthy people never interfere. They just watch. Then my gaze landed on Vincent Moretti. He was already looking at me. Calm. Still. One hand resting beside a half-finished glass of whiskey. Something about those cold gray eyes made the words spill out before pride could stop them. "Please," I whispered shakily, tears blurring my vision. Please don't let him take me. Ryan laughed under his breath. Mind your business, old man. Vincent Moretti slowly stood up. No rush. No anger. Just quiet certainty. The movement alone changed the air inside the restaurant. Men near the bar immediately stepped back. Even Ryan's grip loosened slightly without meaning to. Vincent adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket once before looking directly at Ryan, with an expression so unreadable it became terrifying. Then he spoke in a low, calm voice that somehow carried through the entire room. Try! Nobody moved. That was the first thing I noticed after Vincent Moretti said that single word. Nobody in the restaurant even breathed normally anymore. Ryan stood frozen beside me, his hand still wrapped around my wrist, but the confidence draining from his face happened so fast it almost looked painful. Vincent did not raise his voice. He did not threaten him. Somehow that made everything worse. The old Mafia boss simply looked at Ryan the way winter looks at dying leaves. Cold. Certain. Final. Rain streaked down the tall windows behind him, while jazz music continued softly through hidden speakers overhead, completely disconnected from the tension swallowing the room. Ryan swallowed hard and laughed nervously. This is between me and my girlfriend, he said, trying to sound tougher than he suddenly looked. I do not think she agrees. Vincent's voice remained calm. Controlled. One of the men near the bar stepped forward slightly. I had not even noticed him before. Tall. Broad shoulders. Black coat tailored too perfectly to hide the fact he was security. Then another appeared near the entrance. And another beside the hallway leading toward the private rooms. They moved so quietly it felt unreal, like shadows materializing from nowhere. Ryan noticed them too. His grip on my wrist loosened another inch. Claire, he muttered tightly without taking his eyes off Vincent. Tell this old man to stay out of it. But my throat had locked shut. Because for the first time in months, Ryan looked afraid instead of angry. The difference changed everything. Vincent reached for his whiskey glass and took one slow sip without breaking eye contact. The ice clinked softly against crystal. You embarrassed yourself tonight, he said. Do not make the mistake of embarrassing yourself further. Ryan's jaw tightened. You think money scares me? One of Vincent's men almost smiled at that. Not amusement. Pity. The old Mafia boss set his glass down carefully on the white linen tablecloth before speaking again. No, he said quietly. But experience should. Silence crashed over the room again. Ryan finally released my wrist completely. He'd rushed back into my fingers painfully where he had been holding me too hard. I stepped backward automatically, breathing unevenly, trying not to shake. Ryan looked around the restaurant like he expected someone to support him, but nobody would even meet his eyes now. Even my manager suddenly seemed fascinated by polishing silverware near the kitchen entrance. Manhattan had rules. And apparently Vincent Moretti was one of them. Ryan forced another laugh, weaker this time. This is insane! Vincent tilted his head slightly. Then leave. 3 words. Calm as snowfall. But Ryan actually stepped back. I saw it happen. The same man who had screamed at me in parking lots at 2 in the morning. The same man who punched walls beside my head whenever he lost control. He backed away from a 65-year-old man who never even raised his voice. Ryan pointed at me once more, desperate to recover some pride. You are coming home eventually. Vincent's expression did not change. No, he said softly. She is not. Ryan stared at him for another second before finally turning toward the exit. The heavy restaurant doors slammed behind him, letting in one sharp burst of cold rain before silence returned again. Nobody moved for several heartbeats. Then conversation slowly restarted around us like nothing had happened. Forks clinked. Glasses lifted. Wealthy people returned to pretending they had seen nothing. My knees suddenly felt weak. I looked down at the shattered wine glass still scattered across the marble floor beside my shoes. My hands would not stop trembling. "Claire!" Vincent's voice startled me. Gentler now somehow. I looked up carefully. Up close, he looked older than before. Fine silver lines near his eyes. A faint scar near his temple disappearing beneath gray hair. Tiredness hidden beneath all that terrifying control. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question nearly broke something inside me because Ryan had never asked me that once. Not once. I opened my mouth to answer, but emotion climbed too fast into my throat. Vincent glanced briefly toward one of his men. "Bring her coat," he said calmly. Then those cold gray eyes returned to mine. "You should not go home tonight." The rain felt colder outside Belladonna's. Manhattan after midnight always looked beautiful from a distance, but standing on the sidewalk in wet shoes with shaking hands, it suddenly felt enormous and lonely. I wrapped my thin coat tighter around myself while the restaurant doors closed behind me, sealing away the warm light and piano music. A black umbrella appeared above my head before I even noticed someone approaching. One of Vincent Moretti's men stood beside me silently, holding the umbrella without looking directly at me. "Mr. Moretti asked that you wait inside the vehicle," he said politely. Not demanded. Asked. That somehow unsettled me more. Across the street, headlights reflected against the rain-slick pavement in long silver streaks. 3 black SUVs waited near the curb, engines humming softly like sleeping predators. The city traffic moved around them carefully, almost instinctively. I glanced back toward the restaurant entrance. Vincent emerged a moment later, buttoning his charcoal overcoat with slow, precise movements. Men half his age moved quickly around him, opening doors, scanning sidewalks, speaking quietly into earpieces. But Vincent walked like none of it mattered. Like the entire city would simply wait for him to finish crossing the street. Rain touched the silver at his temples without ruining a single strand of hair. He looked less like a criminal and more like an aging king who had grown tired of watching lesser men disappoint him. I realized then that I had never seen someone so completely comfortable with power. "You do not have to look so frightened," he said as he stopped beside me beneath the umbrella. His voice remained calm, almost gentle under the storm. "I am not going to hurt you. That is not what scares me," I admitted quietly before I could stop myself. One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. More like recognition. "Good," he said. "It means you are smarter than most people." One of the SUV doors opened automatically beside him, warm light spilling across the wet sidewalk. I hesitated. Every warning my mother ever gave me echoed in my head. Do not get into cars with strangers. Do not trust powerful men. Do not mistake kindness for safety. But Ryan knew where I lived. And for the first time in almost a year, the thought of going home terrified me more than getting into a vehicle with the most feared man in New York. Vincent seemed to understand the war happening inside my head because he did not pressure me. He simply waited while rain fell around us in soft, endless waves. Finally, I climbed into the SUV. The leather seats smelled expensive. Cedarwood and clean cologne lingered faintly in the warm air. The interior was silent except for distant jazz music playing through hidden speakers. Vincent slid into the seat across from me, while one of his men closed the door gently behind us. The city disappeared instantly. No traffic noise. No rain. Just quiet. Dangerous quiet. I folded my hands tightly in my lap, so he would not see them trembling. "Do you always rescue waitresses from bad relationships?" I asked nervously. Vincent looked out the tinted window as the convoy pulled away from the curb. Manhattan lights streaked gold across the glass. "No," he said simply. "Then why tonight?" He was quiet for several seconds. Long enough that I thought he might ignore the question entirely. Because men who frighten women disgust me. The answer came without emotion. Flat. Certain. But something underneath those words felt old. Personal. I studied him carefully, while the city passed outside in blurred reflections. Up close, age showed itself more clearly now. Faint lines near his eyes. Silver threading through dark hair. Hands large and steady resting against the black cane beside him. I had not noticed the cane before. For some reason, that detail humanized him more than anything else. Powerful men were not supposed to age. They were not supposed to limp slightly when they moved. Ryan was not always like this, I whispered before meaning to. Vincent finally looked at me. Directly again. Gray eyes sharp as winter storms. Yes, he said quietly. He was. The words landed harder than they should have. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The SUV slowed beneath the glowing entrance of a towering Fifth Avenue building lined with marble columns and gold light. A doorman hurried forward immediately, opening the umbrella before the driver even reached the curb. I stared upward at the massive penthouse windows disappearing into the rain clouds overhead. Vincent reached for the door handle, then paused. Claire, he said calmly. Nobody will touch you here. I wanted to believe him. That was the frightening part. The elevator ride to the penthouse took less than a minute, but it felt longer because neither of us spoke. Soft classical music drifted through hidden speakers, while golden floor numbers climbed steadily above the mirrored doors. I stood near the corner clutching my coat too tightly, painfully aware of Vincent beside me. Up close, he carried none of the restless energy wealthy men usually had. No nervous checking of phones. No talking just to fill silence. He stood perfectly still with one hand resting on the black cane beside him, gray eyes fixed ahead, like a man used to waiting out storms. When the elevator doors finally opened, I forgot how to breathe for a second. The penthouse stretched across what looked like the entire top floor of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the enormous living room, revealing Manhattan glowing beneath sheets of rain and silver fog. The space should have felt cold with all that marble and glass, but it did not. Warm amber lamps softened the shadows. Jazz played quietly somewhere deeper inside the apartment. A fireplace crackled near a massive bookshelf lined with old leather-bound novels. It did not feel like the home of a monster. That unsettled me more than if it had. You can leave your coat there, Vincent said calmly, as one of the staff disappeared soundlessly down the hallway. I realized then there were almost no people around despite the size of the penthouse. No loud bodyguards standing in corners. No women. No servants rushing nervously through rooms. Just quiet. Endless quiet. Do you live here alone? I asked before thinking better of it. Vincent removed his overcoat carefully and draped it across a chair. Mostly. Something about that answer made the apartment feel sad instead of luxurious. I followed him farther inside, while trying not to stare openly at everything around me. Original paintings hung against dark walls. Fresh lilies rested in crystal vases. The scent of cedarwood and coffee lingered faintly in the warm air. Nothing looked excessive. Expensive, yes, but controlled. Intentional. Like every object belonged exactly where it had been placed years ago, and never moved again. Vincent loosened the cuffs of his white dress shirt slowly before glancing toward me. You are staring. He'd rushed into my face instantly. Sorry. To my surprise, his expression softened slightly. Most people do. He moved toward a polished wooden bar near the windows and poured himself a small glass of amber whiskey. His movements remained steady despite the cane. Familiar. Practiced. I noticed then that he favored his left leg slightly whenever he turned. Old injury, maybe. Do you want tea? He asked without looking at me. The question startled me. Not because of what he offered. Because of how normal it sounded. Tea? You look cold. I blinked several times. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I had expected threats, interrogations, questions about Ryan. Instead, this terrifying man was asking if I wanted tea while rain painted silver patterns across Manhattan behind him. Okay, I answered quietly. Vincent nodded once and disappeared into the kitchen himself instead of calling staff. I stood awkwardly near the fireplace listening to cabinets open and close softly from the next room. My nerves still buzzed beneath my skin, but something else had started mixing with the fear now. Confusion. The penthouse felt less like a criminal empire and more like the home of a man who had stopped expecting company years ago. My eyes drifted toward the grand piano near the windows. Dustless, perfectly maintained. Beside it sat a framed photograph. I stepped closer before I could stop myself. A little girl around 8 years old smiled brightly at the camera while sitting beside a younger Vincent Moretti. He looked different then. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, happier. The girl had his gray eyes. Her name was Isabella. Vincent's voice behind me nearly made me jump. I turned too quickly and found him standing quietly a few feet away holding 2 steaming mugs. His gaze rested on the photograph with an expression I could not fully understand. Not anger. Not grief exactly. Something older than both. Your daughter? I asked softly. Vincent handed me the tea carefully. Yes. The single word landed heavily in the enormous apartment. I looked back at the smiling child in the photograph. Suddenly the silence inside the penthouse made sense. The untouched piano. The loneliness hidden beneath all the elegance. Vincent stood beside me staring at the picture for several long seconds before finally speaking again. She would have been close to your age now. Something in his voice made my chest ache unexpectedly. Because for the first time since meeting Vincent Moretti, the most frightening thing about him was not his power. It was how much sadness he carried without showing any of it. I should have slept. The guest bedroom alone was larger than my entire apartment in Queens, with soft cream-colored walls, fresh flowers near the windows, and sheets that felt impossibly expensive against my skin. But my body refused to relax. Too much had happened in one night. Ryan's face still flashed through my mind every time I closed my eyes. Then Vincent's voice replaced it. Calm. Controlled. Terrifying in a completely different way. Around 2 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to sleep. The rain had softened outside, turning Manhattan into a blurry sea of silver lights beyond the windows. I slipped quietly from the bedroom and padded barefoot down the dark hallway, following the faint sound of music drifting through the penthouse. Old jazz, slow trumpet and piano, lonely music. The apartment looked different at night. Softer somehow. Lamps glowed low against dark marble, while the city shimmered endlessly beyond the glass walls. I found Vincent sitting alone near the fireplace wearing a black sweater. Instead of his suit jacket now, silver reading glasses low on his nose, an open book resting in one hand. A half-finished cup of coffee sat untouched beside him. He looked up immediately the second I stepped into the room. You should be asleep, he said quietly. I could say the same thing to you. Something flickered briefly in his eyes at that. Amusement, maybe. At my age, sleep becomes unreliable. I hesitated awkwardly near the hallway entrance. Sorry. I did not mean to interrupt. You are not interrupting anything. Vincent closed the book carefully and removed his glasses. Without them, he somehow looked older, more tired. The firelight softened the sharp edges of his face, casting shadows beneath silver hair and tired gray eyes. Come sit down before you freeze to death, he added calmly. I moved cautiously toward the fireplace and sat on the opposite end of the enormous leather couch. Warmth from the fire curled against my skin instantly. Neither of us spoke for a minute. The silence should have felt uncomfortable. Instead, it felt strangely peaceful. Vincent finally reached for the coffee beside him and frowned slightly after tasting it. "Cold," he muttered. "You want fresh coffee?" I blinked in surprise. "You make your own coffee?" "Claire," he said dryly, "I am 65 years old, not helpless." That startled an actual laugh out of me before I could stop it. A real laugh. Small, shaky, unfamiliar after months of surviving instead of living. Vincent looked at me quietly for a second, like the sound surprised him too. Then he stood slowly, with the help of his cane, and disappeared into the kitchen. I listened to cabinets opening softly. The low hum of an espresso machine. Rain tapping gently against glass 50 stories above Manhattan. The domestic normalcy of it all felt surreal. The most feared man in New York making coffee at 2 in the morning, while Jess played beside a fireplace. When Vincent returned, he handed me a warm ceramic mug before lowering himself carefully back onto the couch. "Thank you," I murmured. "You apologize too much and thank people too quickly," he observed calmly. I stared down at the steam curling from my cup. That usually keeps men calm. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Silence settled heavily between us. Vincent did not react immediately, but something hardened behind his eyes. Not toward me. Toward the memory of what I meant. "No," he said after a moment. "It keeps cruel men comfortable." I swallowed hard. Firelight danced softly across the room, while distant thunder rolled somewhere over the Hudson River. Vincent leaned back against the couch slowly, one hand resting over the carved silver handle of his cane. "How long?" he asked quietly. He did not need to explain the question. "Almost a year." Shame burned hot beneath my skin instantly. It was not always bad. Vincent looked into the fire instead of at me. The dangerous ones rarely begin that way. Something about the certainty in his voice made me study him carefully. "You sound like you have seen it before." His expression did not change, but the room suddenly felt colder anyway. More times than I care to remember. I took another sip of coffee just to steady my shaking hands. "Why are you helping me?" I asked softly. "Really?" Vincent stayed silent so long I thought he might refuse to answer again. Then his gray eyes finally lifted toward me through the firelight. "Because one night," he said quietly, "someone begged for help in front of me." My chest tightened unexpectedly. "And?" The old Mafia boss stared into the flames with an expression emptier than grief. "And I arrived too late. I barely slept after that conversation." Vincent's words followed me through the rest of the night like quiet footsteps behind a locked door. "And I arrived too late." He had said it so calmly, but grief that old does not disappear. It hardens. It settles into a person's bones until they carry it everywhere without realizing it anymore. Morning arrived gray and rainy over Manhattan. I woke to soft light filtering through massive windows and the unfamiliar smell of fresh coffee drifting through the penthouse. For one confused second, I forgot where I was. Then reality rushed back all at once. Ryan. Belladonna's. Vincent Moretti. I sat up too quickly and noticed folded clothes waiting neatly at the end of the bed. Soft cream. Sweater. Dark jeans. New. My stomach tightened instantly. Nobody had bought me clothes in years without expecting something in return. I stared at them for a long moment before finally changing anyway, because my work uniform still smelled like rain and shattered wine glasses. The sweater fit perfectly. That unsettled me too. When I stepped quietly into the kitchen, Vincent was already there reading the morning newspaper beside enormous windows overlooking Central Park. He looked completely different in daylight. Less like an untouchable myth and more like an aging man carrying exhaustion behind expensive suits and controlled silence. Sunlight caught silver strands in his hair while steam curled upward from the black coffee beside him. "Good morning," he said without looking up from the paper. I stopped awkwardly near the marble island. Morning. His gray eyes finally lifted toward me briefly. The clothes suit you. He touched my cheeks immediately. You did not have to buy these. I know. The answer came simply. No hidden meaning beneath it. Just truth. A woman around 60 entered quietly from another hallway carrying a tray of breakfast pastries. Unlike the silent security downstairs, she smiled warmly at me. You must be Claire, she said kindly. I am Rosa. Vincent folded the newspaper carefully. Rosa has worked for me longer than most governments survive. Rosa rolled her eyes affectionately. And he has been impossible for all of it. I blinked in surprise. Impossible was not a word I expected anyone to use casually around Vincent Moretti. But Vincent only took another sip of coffee without protesting. Something softened in the room watching them together. Familiarity. History. The kind loneliness cannot erase completely. Eat something, Rosa insisted gently, setting fresh pastries near me. You are too thin. I almost refused automatically out of habit. Then my stomach betrayed me by growling softly enough for everyone to hear. Rosa smiled knowingly, while Vincent hid what looked suspiciously like amusement behind his coffee cup. For a few minutes, the morning felt almost normal. Rain against windows. Warm pastries. Just playing quietly somewhere. Deeper inside the penthouse. Then Vincent's phone rang. The entire atmosphere changed instantly. He answered without checking the screen. Speak. His voice turned colder within seconds. Not louder. Worse. Rosa noticed it too, because her expression tightened slightly while she quietly gathered dishes. I focused on my coffee, pretending not to listen. No, Vincent said calmly into the phone. You will not contact her again. Silence followed while someone spoke angrily on the other end. Vincent's gray eyes shifted toward me briefly across the kitchen. Then you should have thought about consequences before embarrassing yourself publicly. My chest tightened. Ryan. It had to be. Vincent listened another moment before ending the call with one final sentence. This discussion is over. He placed the phone down carefully beside his newspaper. Not a single movement wasted. But tension lingered beneath his calm exterior now, like storm clouds waiting offshore. Was that Ryan? I asked quietly. Vincent did not answer immediately. Yes. Fear crawled coldly through my stomach. What did he want? You? The single word landed heavily between us. I stared down at my untouched coffee cup while rain streaked silver against the window's 50 floors above Manhattan. He will not stop, I whispered. Vincent studied me quietly for several seconds before speaking. No, he agreed calmly. Men like him rarely do. Something in his tone made me finally look back up. The old Mafia boss leaned slightly against the marble counter with one hand resting over the silver handle of his cane, gray eyes colder now than I had seen before. But Claire, he said softly, there are also men who do not lose twice. A chill moved through me that had nothing to do with fear this time. Because for the first time, I realized Vincent Moretti was no longer simply protecting me. He was preparing for something. By the third day, the entire city seemed to know Vincent Moretti had brought a young woman into his penthouse. I realized it the moment people started staring at me differently. The concierge downstairs suddenly greeted me by name. Restaurant reservations appeared without asking. Even the florist, delivering fresh lilies every morning, gave me a nervous smile like I belonged there now. But the strangest part was Vincent himself. He never treated me like property. Never acted possessive. If anything, he gave me too much space. That morning, I found him standing near the windows overlooking Central Park, speaking quietly with two men in dark suits, while rain drifted softly against the glass behind them. Their conversation stopped the second I entered the room. One of the men glanced at me briefly before lowering his eyes respectfully. Respectfully? Nobody had ever looked at me that way before. Vincent noticed my expression immediately. "You should eat breakfast before coffee destroys your stomach," he said calmly, dismissing the two men with a small nod. They disappeared soundlessly down the hallway. "You always know when people are talking about me?" I asked carefully. Vincent reached for the silver espresso pot near the counter. "Usually." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." The answer came without hesitation. I leaned against the marble island watching him pour coffee with those same steady hands that somehow terrified half the city. Outside, fog curled between skyscrapers while black umbrellas moved like shadows across Fifth Avenue far below. Everything about Vincent's world felt distant from normal life. Untouchable. Yet somehow I had ended up inside it. "Who were they?" I asked quietly. Vincent slid a warm coffee cup toward me before answering. "Men concerned about appearances." "Meaning?" One corner of his mouth moved faintly. "Meaning old men become very uncomfortable when newspapers begin inventing romantic stories." I nearly choked on my coffee. "What?" Actual amusement flickered briefly across Vincent's face now. "Relax, Claire. You are not marrying me tomorrow." Heat flooded my cheeks instantly while he calmly returned to reading a financial report like he had not just said something completely insane. "People really think that?" I asked weakly. Vincent finally looked up again. "People fear what they cannot understand." His gray eyes studied me carefully over the rim of his coffee cup. "A man like me protecting a woman publicly creates." Speculation? I stared down into my coffee while embarrassment twisted through my stomach. "I should leave then." The words came out softer than I intended. Vincent's expression changed instantly. Not anger. Something quieter. More dangerous. "No," he said calmly. "Ryan is still unstable. You cannot protect me forever." Silence settled between us for several seconds. Then Vincent lowered the report slowly onto the counter. "Claire," he said quietly, "do you know why men like Ryan become dangerous?" I shook my head slightly. "Because they mistake access for ownership." The words landed heavily in the quiet kitchen. Vincent's voice remained controlled, but something cold moved beneath it now. "The moment a cruel man believes you belong to him, he stops seeing you as human." I swallowed hard because every sentence felt painfully true. Vincent watched me carefully for another second before softening his tone slightly. "You are not responsible for his behavior." Nobody had ever said that to me before. Not my mother. Not my friends who slowly disappeared because Ryan hated them. Not even myself. I stared out the windows quickly before emotion could show too clearly on my face. Far below us, Manhattan moved through another rainy morning completely unaware of the strange safety I had found 50 stories above the city. Then one of Vincent's men appeared quietly near the hallway entrance. Tall. Dark coat. Expression unreadable. "Sir," he said carefully, "there is a situation downstairs." The atmosphere changed immediately. Vincent did not move at first, but every trace of warmth disappeared from his face. "Explain." "Mr. Keller is outside the building." My stomach dropped so fast it hurt. The guard continued carefully. "He brought several men with him." Silence swallowed the kitchen whole. Vincent stood slowly with one hand resting over the silver handle of his cane. Calm. Controlled. Far too calm. "Did he threaten anyone?" "No, sir. But he is demanding to see Miss Bennet." Vincent adjusted the cuff of his dark sweater once before looking toward the rain-soaked skyline beyond the windows. "How disappointing," he murmured softly. Then his gray eyes shifted toward me. "Cold as winter now." "It seems," he said quietly, "Mr. Keller has mistaken my patience for weakness." The elevator ride downstairs felt colder than the rain outside. My pulse would not slow no matter how hard I tried to breathe normally. Vincent stood beside me in complete silence, one hand resting lightly over the silver handle of his cane, while the floor numbers descended steadily beneath soft golden light. Two of his men waited behind us near the mirrored wall, calm and expressionless like they had done this 100 times before. Maybe they had, but I had not. My hands shook slightly at my sides, while memories of Ryan screaming in parking lots and pounding on apartment doors replayed endlessly in my head. Vincent noticed without looking directly at me. "You do not have to see him," he said quietly. "He will not enter this building." I swallowed hard. "He will keep coming back." "No," Vincent answered calmly. "He will not." The certainty in his voice should have comforted me. Instead, it terrified me a little. Because men only sounded that certain when they had the power to make promises reality. The elevator doors opened into the private lobby downstairs, where polished marble reflected soft chandelier light across the floor. Security guards stood near the entrance, speaking urgently into earpieces. Through the tall glass windows, I could see Ryan outside beneath the rain. He looked different now. Less confident. More desperate. 3 men stood behind him pretending to look intimidating. But even from inside the lobby I could tell they were nervous. Nobody wanted problems connected to Vincent Moretti. Ryan spotted me instantly through the glass. His face changed with relief and anger all at once. He stepped toward the entrance before security blocked him firmly. "Claire!" His voice echoed faintly through the storm outside. "Baby, please! Just talk to me." My chest tightened automatically at the familiar tone. Soft. Apologetic. The version of Ryan that always appeared after the shouting ended. Vincent remained perfectly still beside me. "Notice something," he murmured quietly without taking his eyes off Ryan. "He only becomes gentle when he is losing control." The words hit painfully because they were true. Ryan pressed closer to the glass doors. "Claire, he is manipulating you. You do not even know who this man is." Vincent finally stepped forward then. Slow. Controlled. The entire lobby seemed to tighten around him instantly. Security straightened. Conversation stopped. Even Ryan's friends shifted uneasily beneath the rain outside. One of the guards moved to open the doors, but Vincent raised one finger slightly without looking back. "Not yet." Ryan's voice grew louder. "You think he actually cares about you? Men like him do not help people for free." Vincent's expression never changed. "Interesting," he said quietly beside me. "He believes kindness must always cost something." Rain hammered against the glass harder now, while thunder rolled over Manhattan. Ryan pointed toward Vincent angrily. "You are hiding behind an old man who buys people." The lobby fell silent. Truly silent. I looked toward Vincent instinctively, expecting anger. But the old Mafia boss only adjusted the cuff of his dark coat once before speaking calmly to security. "Open the doors." Cold rain and city noise rushed instantly into the lobby. Ryan straightened immediately like he had finally gotten what he wanted. Vincent stepped forward alone onto the wet pavement outside, while the rest of us remained under the warm lobby lights. He looked taller somehow standing there in the rain with silver hair dampened slightly at the temples and gray eyes colder than the storm overhead. Ryan tried to hold his ground. "She is coming home with me." Vincent studied him quietly for several long seconds. "No," he said simply. "She is choosing not to." "You think she actually wants to stay with you?" Ryan snapped. "Look at you. You are old enough to be her grandfather." The insult hung heavily in the rain-soaked silence. Vincent did not react at all. That somehow made it worse. "You mistake age for weakness," he said calmly. "That is a common error among insecure men." Ryan laughed bitterly. "And what are you supposed to be? Her hero?" Vincent glanced back toward me standing frozen inside the lobby. Something softer flickered briefly behind his cold gray eyes, before disappearing again. "No," he answered quietly. "Just the first man who listened when she said she was afraid." My throat tightened painfully. Ryan looked at me then. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time in months. "Claire," he said desperately, "you are seriously choosing him over me?" Rain blurred the city lights behind him, while my heart pounded unevenly inside my chest. Fear still lived there, but something else had started growing beside it now. Exhaustion. Clarity. The understanding that surviving someone is not the same thing as loving them. I stepped forward slowly until I stood beside Vincent beneath the edge of the building awning. Then I looked Ryan directly in the eyes, and said the words I should have said a year ago. "I am choosing myself." Ryan stared at me like he did not recognize the person standing in front of him anymore. Rain slid down his face in silver lines beneath the city lights, while thunder rolled softly somewhere beyond the skyline. For a long moment, nobody moved. Not the security guards near the entrance. Not the men Ryan brought with him. Not even me. Because saying those words out loud felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering the ground was still there beneath my feet. I am choosing myself. Ryan's expression shifted slowly from disbelief to something emptier. Sadder maybe? Or simply wounded pride finally realizing it had lost. "Claire," he said quietly, almost pleading now, "after everything?" Vincent remained beside me in complete silence, one hand resting lightly over his cane, while Rain touched the shoulders of his dark coat. He did not interrupt, did not control the moment. He simply stood there like a wall no storm could move. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself against the cold wind. "Love is not supposed to make someone afraid all the time," I whispered. Ryan looked away first. That surprised me more than anything else. The version of him I remembered would have argued harder, manipulated harder. But exhaustion hung over him now too. Maybe people eventually grow tired of carrying their own anger. He glanced once toward Vincent before letting out a bitter laugh under his breath. "You really think he is better than me?" Vincent's gray eyes finally lifted toward him. Calm. Sharp. Unreadable. "No," the old Mafia boss answered quietly. "I simply know she deserves better than fear." Silence settled heavily again beneath the rain. Ryan looked at me one final time, but whatever he saw there must have convinced him this was truly over because something inside him finally seemed to loosen. He nodded once slowly before stepping backward toward the sidewalk. "You always did have terrible taste in men," he muttered weakly. To my surprise, I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because for the first time in a year, his words no longer controlled how I felt about myself. Ryan turned and walked away into the rain without another argument. The three men beside him followed quickly behind. Within seconds, they disappeared into the moving blur of Manhattan traffic and glowing brake lights. Gone. Just like that. My knees suddenly felt weak again once the adrenaline faded. Vincent noticed immediately. "Inside," he said calmly. Warmth rushed over us the moment the lobby doors closed behind us again. The doorman avoided looking directly at either of us while security quietly returned to their positions like none of it had happened. But everything had changed. I felt it. Vincent removed his rain-soaked coat slowly, while one of his men stepped forward to take it respectfully. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," Vincent said without raising his voice. "Yes, sir." The guard disappeared instantly. I stared at Vincent in confusion as we crossed the marble lobby toward the elevators. "You are canceling meetings because of me?" "Yes." "Why?" He glanced toward me briefly while pressing the elevator button. "Because you look exhausted." The simplicity of the answer hit me harder than dramatic declarations ever could have. The elevator doors opened softly, and we stepped inside alone. Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls as we rose higher above the city again. I watched rain crawl across the windows while silence settled comfortably between us for the first time. Not fearful silence. Peaceful silence. Vincent stood beside me with one hand resting over his cane, silver hair, catching the soft golden elevator light. Older. Tired. Dangerous. But somehow safer than anywhere I had been in years. "You know," I said quietly after a while, "you never actually told me why everyone fears you so much." One corner of his mouth moved faintly. "That is probably for the best. Vincent." My voice softened slightly. "I am serious." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for the first time since meeting him, the coldness in his gray eyes faded completely. "Claire," he said quietly, "when people spend enough years surviving darkness, eventually the darkness begins surviving through them." The elevator doors opened onto the penthouse floor again, warm jazz drifting softly through the hallway beyond. Vincent stepped out first, moving slower than before, the old injury in his leg more visible after standing in the rain so long. But just before I followed him into the apartment, he stopped near the doorway without turning around. "Do not mistake me for a good man," he said calmly. Then, after a small pause, his voice softened almost imperceptibly. "Just one who finally got tired of failing the women he could not save." Something painful tightened inside my chest as I watched him walk slowly toward the fireplace and the endless gray skyline beyond the windows. And standing there beneath the soft jazz and rain-soaked Manhattan light, I realized the most dangerous thing about Vincent Moretti was never his power. It was that beneath all the fear surrounding his name, there was still enough humanity left in him to break your heart.